90% of fresh tomatoes in the United States come from Mexico. That's over $3 billion crossing the border each year, quietly, reliably, until now. On July 14, 2025, without warning or a transition plan, the U.S. government imposed a 17% tariff on every tomato imported from Mexico. No press conference, no congressional debate, just a line of policy dropped like a stone into a pond. Weeks later, prices surged. In Raleigh, North Carolina, prices jumped more than 40%. At one grocery store, a mother picked up a tomato, hesitated, and put it back. Salsa vanished from restaurant menus. School salads turned pale and colorless. And in cities across the country, Americans started asking the same quiet question. What just happened? This wasn't about farming. It wasn't about fairness. It was a shift, abrupt, calculated, and loaded with meaning. On that July day, a single move quietly rewrote the rules of North American agriculture. The U.S. government officially terminated the 2019 Tomato Suspension Agreement with Mexico, a trade pact once praised for stabilizing prices and keeping supply chains predictable. For years, that deal acted as a safety valve. When disputes flared, it kept talks civil and trade flowing. But this time, there were no talks, no warnings, no working groups, just a press release. A cedeix la suta tarifa, effective immediately. According to reports from Axios and ABC News, there was no grace period, no exceptions for existing shipments. Tomatoes already loaded on trucks, already en route, were hit the moment they crossed the border. Importers called it a blindside. Economists called it reckless. Grocers called it a crisis. Within just 2 months, tomato prices in the U.S. rose between 30% and 45% in major cities. In Raleigh, a pound of beefsteak tomatoes climbed from $2.99 to $4.35. In Los Angeles, Roma tomatoes, once under $1, spiked past $3.80. For working families, this wasn't just inflation. It was a gut punch. School cafeterias dropped fresh salads. Fast food joints swapped out fresh salsa for processed paste. And in suburban kitchens across the country, tomato sauce got watered down, stretched out for one more night. But this went beyond shopping lists. In Florida, dozens of small, Latino-owned import businesses collapsed within weeks. Unable to absorb the price shock, they folded, one after another. Hundreds of warehouse workers, drivers, and farm liaisons, many who spent their careers connecting U.S. demand with Mexican supply, were suddenly out of work. No hearings, no safety net. Just locked gates and a severance envelope. Even seasoned trade analysts were stunned. Yes, changes were expected. But not this. Not a 17% tariff dropped overnight, without consultation or planning. A July 2025 report by MarketWatch warned the fallout could spread, affecting packaging, refrigeration, and logistics. Smaller transport companies could go under. Food prices might spike across the board. And Washington's rationale? Simple: protect American farmers. But who exactly are we protecting? Florida tomato farms only operate seasonally. Northern states like New York, Illinois, and Minnesota rely almost entirely on imports. And California's tomato production has been shrinking for years, crippled by drought and labor shortages. So the question started spreading. Was this really about farming? Or was this about politics? Mexico didn't fight the tariff. They didn't scream or protest. They adapted, quietly, strategically. While Washington made noise, Mexico got to work. Engineers and logistics executives mapped a new export route. Far from the U.S. in just 3 months, a new corridor opened. Trains now depart daily from Bajío, Mexico's agricultural heart, through northern Chihuahua, veering east into Ontario and Quebec. No U.S. checkpoints, no customs delays, no tariffs. A cold chain logistics feat, not built in anger, but in precision. Refrigerated containers, insulated, sensor-controlled, keep produce at a steady 1 degree Celsius, even over a 1,200-mile journey. The result? 4 to 5 extra days of shelf life. Less spoilage. Fewer rejections. Lower costs. According to Canadian Pacific Kansas City, CPKC, the rail line reduces logistics costs by 15% compared to trucking through the U.S. While America slapped a tax on the tomato, Mexico optimized its path. What seemed like a short-term fix became permanent with contracts. Top Canadian supermarket chains, Loblaws, Metro, didn't just visit farms. They signed 5-year agreements. With every new container that rolled north, a silent message was carried. Mexico's not coming back. No angry press releases. No speeches. No hashtags. Just fresh produce moving through new supply lines. A senior Canadian trade advisor said it best. They didn't fight the tariff. They outgrew it. And what really stings U.S. officials is that this wasn't just a logistical pivot. It was a shift in trust. Buyers who once routed goods through Texas are now investing in Montreal and Toronto. Ports in California and Arizona, seeing fewer contracts, less volume. Meanwhile, U.S. farmers, retailers, and shoppers are left watching trains pass, confused, not angry. Because there was no dramatic standoff, no last-minute compromise. Mexico didn't climb over the tariff wall. They tunneled under it, efficiently, quietly. And that tunnel may be permanent. According to Bloomberg Green, by 2026, 48% of Mexico's fresh tomato exports will go to Canada, up from less than 1% just 2 years ago. And it's not just tomatoes. Avocados, strawberries, bell peppers, all moving north, not to the US, but to Canada. No speeches, just farm visits and signatures. Canadian grocery executives flew directly to Guanajuato and Jalisco. No photo ops, just soil tests, irrigation inspections, and taste checks. And then they signed. 5-year contracts locked in through 2030. As one logistics director from Metro put it, "We don't sign deals based on election cycles." That line said it all. Washington may shift trade policy every 4 years. Ottawa keeps its word across decades. And that quiet consistency turned Canada from a footnote into a trading anchor. A July 2025 FreightWaves report confirmed it. Mexico's tomato exports to Canada have jumped from near zero to nearly half the total market in just 18 months. And it's not just produce anymore. Avocados, strawberries, bell peppers, all using the same cold chain rails. All bypassing U.S. ports. All flowing through Canadian hubs from Quebec City to Vancouver. Meanwhile, U.S. numbers tell a grim story. Supply chain analysts at A-Tools reported a 22% spike in wholesale tomato prices by late July 2025. Retailers blamed delays, tariffs, and inconsistent inspections. One Florida produce manager said it felt like playing roulette with perishables. Compare that to Canada's new average, 8% lower landed costs per crate. In U.S. border towns like Buffalo and El Paso, warehouses are closing. In McAllen, Texas, a tomato distribution firm laid off 74 workers in 1 month. Across the border in Windsor, Ontario, a new cold storage facility opened, fully staffed, fully booked into 2026. This wasn't just a tariff. It was a tax on the dinner table. Maria, a single mom in New Jersey, used to buy a pound of tomatoes every Sunday. Now, she buys canned beans. Her 5-year-old doesn't notice. But his heart might, one day. In Laredo, Texas, Tom, a retired welder on Social Security, says the produce aisle feels like a luxury store. Used to be you could get a week's worth for $20, he says. Now I just go to the freezer section. In Detroit, the Wilson family lives on SNAP benefits. With $173 a week, they used to make ends meet. Now tomatoes, avocados, and peppers are off the list. No more fresh salads, just potatoes and coleslaw. This wasn't a random market shift. This was a policy, and it landed not in Washington, but in kitchen sinks and school lunches. Axios and ABC News confirm. U.S. tomato prices rose 30% to 45% in 2 months. Some organic varieties spiked over 60%. fast food chains responded by quietly cutting fresh salsa and pico de gallo. Even schools took a hit. In Champaign County, Illinois, a public elementary school removed tomato wedges from lunch trays. They were replaced with pre-packaged shredded lettuce. One teacher said it simply, "The kids noticed." They asked where the red was. Because when policy fails, even color disappears from the plate. A $4 tomato isn't just expensive, it's symbolic. It's a test of our priorities. A measure of who pays when government rolls the dice. This time, the gamble wasn't about jobs or borders. It was about taste, nutrition, and dignity. The tariff was supposed to help U.S. farmers. But they're still facing droughts, water shortages, and labor crises. Instead of help, they got headlines. And consumers, the ones who had no voice in this fight, are left footing the bill. In communities already stretched thin, a missing tomato isn't just a missing flavor. It's a quiet humiliation, a reminder of what it costs to eat well in today's America. So yes, the tariff targeted foreign growers. But the pain landed right here, at the fridge, the pantry, and every plate that now feels just a little emptier. If tomatoes can escape America, what might be next? This began with fruit. But by late July 2025, logistics firms in Rotterdam and Hamburg were mapping new routes to bypass U.S. ports entirely. Why pay more? One Dutch supplier asked. Brazil responded, signing a 5-year deal with the Netherlands to ship organic produce directly via Portugal. No U.S. middlemen. Colombia and Peru rerouted their exports to Canada's ports in Vancouver and Halifax. But the real signal came from Asia. In August, delegations from Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan visited Celaya, Mexico, not to negotiate, but to learn. Learn how Mexico rebuilt exports without leaning on the U.S. One South Korean advisor reportedly called Mexico a blueprint of resilience. And they're not just studying. Bloomberg reports that Japanese and German firms are now exploring Mexican electronics hubs as new bases, cutting the U.S. out completely. Meanwhile, Canada saw what was coming and got to work. In September, Agricorp Ontario tested dual-language packaging to legally label Mexican tomatoes as product of Canada under USMCA. Legally sound, logistically seamless, politically untouchable. A Canadian official put it plainly, "If the U.S. wants chaos, we'll offer certainty." Because it's not just about tomatoes. It's about who the world trusts to deliver. European Central Bank analysts warned in July, global trade is quietly pivoting away from US-centric lanes. What began in agriculture could spread to autos, semiconductors, and biotech. The world isn't boycotting America. They're simply avoiding it, silently, efficiently, and maybe for good. Today, it's tomatoes. Tomorrow, it could be circuit boards, brake pads, syringes. Mexico didn't storm out. They strategized. Canada didn't push. They opened the door. And American consumers are paying more, getting less, told it's all in the name of protection. But maybe it's no longer about fruit. Maybe this was the first fracture in something much bigger. A question now hangs over every grocery aisle. Is this just a tomato war or the beginning of America's trade unraveling? And so, what began as a quiet policy change turned into a nationwide shockwave. Not with headlines, but with receipts. Not with protests, but with silence. Across kitchen tables, grocery aisles, and school lunches, Americans are now feeling the impact of a single tariff decision that shifted the balance of trade, perhaps permanently. But here's the truth. This isn't just about tomatoes. It's about how decisions made in silence can echo into everyday life. It's about how a mother in New Jersey, a retiree in Texas, a teacher in Illinois, all now adjust their meals, their budgets, their expectations because of a policy they never saw coming. And while Washington framed it as protectionism, the rest of the world quietly adjusted, reoriented, and moved on. Canada didn't argue. They offered consistency. Mexico didn't retaliate. They adapted. Europe didn't hesitate. They rerouted. The US, meanwhile, is still explaining the price tag. But this story isn't just about economic policy or international trade. It's about trust, about stability, about what happens when politics touches your plate and when everyday people are left paying for choices made behind closed doors. So what comes next? More tariffs? More rerouted trade? Or maybe more Americans asking deeper questions about food, affordability, and where we go from here? Because if a tomato can be taxed, redirected, and politicized, what else is vulnerable? And what happens when the next product doesn't just cost more, but disappears entirely? At Traveling Vibes, we go beyond headlines to bring you the full picture, the untold ripple effects of global decisions on everyday lives. If this story made you think, if it helped you understand the bigger picture, if it made you look at your fridge a little differently, then we invite you to join us. Subscribe to Traveling Vibes and be part of a community that values truth, depth, and clarity in a noisy world. Click that button, hit the bell, and let's keep asking the hard questions together. Because what we eat, how we live, and who we trust depends on it. This is Traveling Vibes. Stay informed, stay connected, and we'll see you in the next story.